In 1774, one of the most influential books ever written was published. This book shaped how our society operates. It changed how resources were allocated. It influenced elections, politics, and in a convoluted way, may have even led to the Cold War. If you're thinking I'm referencing Karl Marx's Das Kapital, you're wrong. I'm actually talking about the book that started the field of economics, The Wealth of Nations. While this book is overlooked in modern economics, at the time it was revolutionary in its insight into both micro and macroeconomics. While some of its ideas such as labour theory of value have been widely discredited, much of what he did describe in his 364-page dive into the trade, wealth and land still holds relevance in the current day, such as the division of labour and comparative advantage. In this video, however, we aren't here to discuss this. Instead, we're going to explore how the change in land ownership and its laws played a pivotal role in transforming Europe from a feudal and impoverished continent into arguably the most developed one. Adam Smith makes the argument that personal greed really did reshape the topography of the land. His logic was that as improvements in technology, trade, and manufacturing came around, more exotic and luxury items could now be purchased. This gave occasion to the landed gentry to spend more of their income on luxury goods compared to before when they used to spend on large banquets and keeping guests. Adam Smith states the assumption that people are more likely to overspend when they are spending on themselves, and so Adam Smith accredits this to causing the landed gentry to sell off parts of their land and sign longer-term rent agreements, which, in turn, had a huge impact on how this land was used. Where before a farmer may only get to lease the land he is farming for 2 years, this meant that it wasn't worth him investing huge amounts of time and his income in improving the land, since he likely won't be the tenant when, pardon the pun, fruits of his labour finally ripen. When this changed and leases for 5, 10, or even outright ownership of the land started becoming available, agricultural output boomed, as suddenly previously poor quality farmland was getting irrigation, fertilizing, and eventually even tractors. The techniques of farming changed as well, as more sustainable and long-term farming strategies fell into favor as farmers now had a stake in maintaining long-term fertility of the soil. While this is all good for farmers and rural people, it was nearly as good for cities, manufacturers, and artisans. This is because the so-called rude produce, like wool, grain, and even mined resources like coal and iron, were now being produced more effectively and in larger amounts, meaning that they could purchase them at lower cost and produce more goods. Pair this with inventions like steam locomotives, steamships, and suddenly you could transport huge amounts of resources from the countryside quickly and cost effectively. In return, the city would send back manufactured goods like textiles and tools. Inheritance laws, or what was known as entail laws, stifled this growth and improvement. These laws meant an ancestor from 300 years ago could decide the terms at which the land was passed down, to who it was passed down, and also restrict whether it could be sold and other stipulations. This led to often only a couple of the landed gentry's children having control of the vast estate, and also preventing them from selling this land. This, as explained by Adam Smith, was one of the reasons land was often tens of times more expensive in Europe than in the Americas. When these laws were simplified in 1833 in Britain, this fueled the further development of the countryside and thus industrialization. This change in land ownership was part of the backbone of what enabled us to create an industrialized society, and it really did alter the landscape as new fields were created, infrastructure, mines, and many other developments. The United States was one of the most advanced nations when it came to land ownership and the laws around it, and this is one of the many complex reasons that it saw such rapid growth after its independence. We can see a furthering of this in modern day China. Areas such as Shenzhen, which have enabled private ownership and more simplified means of land ownership, have seen incredible growth in recent decades, especially when compared to areas which still have nationalised land. Without this change in Europe, it's cast into doubt whether Europe would have been the home of the Industrial Revolution, whether we would have had the means or desire to set forth on even more imperialistic conquest for resources. And I'm sure, without this change in something so overlooked, the world, its developments, borders, events, and conflicts would have turned out very differently. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this, click like, subscribe. I will be posting more. And I'm sorry, this week I had a cold, so my narration is quite poor.